Hello, everyone. Bonsoir tout le monde. My name is Harvey Slack, and I'm a proud trustee of the board of the Ottawa Public Library. Before we begin, it is important to acknowledge that even as we gather virtually, we are on the unceded and ancestral territories of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. We honor all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people, their elders, their ancestors, and their valuable contributions, past and present. It's a pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of the Ottawa Public Library for our fourth author visit in the Ottawa Reads YA series. Our partner in this evening youth literary programming is the Ottawa International Writers Festival, Republic of Youth. Tonight, we are delighted to welcome author Christina Hammonds Reed, who is here to speak about her debut novel, The Black Kids. Christina Hammonds Reed holds an MFA from the University of Southern California School of Cinematic Arts. A native of the Los Angeles area, her work has appeared in the Santa Monica Review and One Team Story. This unforgettable coming-of-age novel explores issues of race, class, and violence through the eyes of a wealthy Black teenager whose family gets caught in the vortex of the 1992 Rodney King Riots. It's described as a brilliantly poetic take on one of the most defining moments in Black American history. It is a labor of love at the Ottawa Public Library to bring you outstanding stories and amazing people who can inspire and challenge us all to explore different perspectives. Don't miss our last session of Ottawa Reads YA on Monday, November 30th with Lindsay Wong. Head to the library website for more information on that event. Enjoy this evening. Thank you. Bonsoir, and over to you, Sean.
Thanks so much, Harvey. As you said, we're broadcasting from the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe, and I'm thrilled to be with you this evening and to welcome everyone to tonight's conversation between Kelliya-Emma Tshiani-Levine, grade 12 student at St. Matthew High School, and Christina Hammonds Reed, the author of the acclaimed novel, The Black Kids. Tonight's event is suitable for writers aged 13 and up and is part of our Republic of Childhood program and the OPL's Ottawa Reads YA Ottawa Boutique. I'm profoundly grateful that even if we cannot gather in person, we're still in a position to celebrate great writing and to amplify the voices of young people. Our official bookseller is Perfect Books, and I want to thank you all for supporting writers, publishers, and booksellers in this difficult time. And wherever you're watching this, there's a fantastic independent bookseller nearby or online who would be more than happy to sell you some great books. Now let's give a warm virtual welcome to our host, Kelliya-Emma Tshiani-Levine.
Good evening, everyone. I'm so excited to be here to moderate this discussion with the amazing author of the book, Christina. Would you like to do a brief reading, Christina?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Bonsoir tout le monde. I am going to start with chapter 5. And just so you know, there's a bit of cursing in here for those of you guys who might be a little sensitive to it. So earplugs for some people. Lucia and I stand in line at Western Union behind a balding Russian man with really long ear hair like my old piano teacher. Save for the television in the corner, it's quiet, eerily so, and I try to keep my feet perfectly still so my sneakers won't squeak on the linoleum. Sometimes, when I have to pee really badly or when I can't make a sound, I pretend that I'm a runaway slave and I have to be very still or else I'll be discovered. It's effed up, but it works. Usually this place is a swirl of tongues and transactions, like waiting at the airport, but without any of the excitement of going somewhere. There's always some baby fussing while some mom screams, "Get down from there," at some kid, which sounds pretty much the same in any language. Today, it's just me, Lucia, and the bald man. Together we watch as a crowd pulls a white man from his truck and begins to beat the shit out of him. His long blonde hair swings from side to side as he staggers, disoriented with each blow. In a different world, he'd be a lead guitarist rocking out, not a broken construction worker tumbling. A man flashes gang signs at the helicopters hovering above. They're not even 10 miles away, but it might as well be a whole different country. They're my fancy school and my fancy neighborhood, and then there's this. The television flickers and fragments across the Russian's head as he shakes it. He turns to look at me angrily. See, he says. Lucia places her body between the two of us. No habla con él, she says. The man returns to the screen. Lucia speaks to me in Spanish when she doesn't want white people to easily understand what we're talking about. She taught me when I was younger, and then as soon as we got a chance to study languages in school, I chose Spanish. And anyway, it's LA. If you even half pay attention to the city around you, you'll learn it by osmosis. It's not like it's a secret language, but it's easier for her and easy enough for me. I'm sure to everyone looking at us, we're an odd pair, a lanky black teenager and a tiny Guatemalan always together. Lucia's favorite cashier is Jose. If he's working, everything goes smoothly, and they joke and laugh in Spanish about how he's going to marry her. When she's done, she kisses her fingertips and places them on the envelope before sliding it across the counter, where Jose converts it into a textbook for Umberto, guitar lessons for Roberto. Today, Jose isn't in a joking mood. El mundo en que vivimos, Jose sighs. His eyes are fixed on the television screen, where the news shows images of a man slamming a slab of concrete down on the truck driver's head. See, Lucia says. Jose's hair is the dark of an oil slick at night. He's younger than Lucia, a Mexican, not Guatemalan. He lives with his cousin and abuelita in a small house in Highland Park with 3 bedrooms and a bathroom, and if you climb up on his roof, you can see the city on a clear day. He sounded like a real estate agent when he told this to Lucia. I'm going to own my own business, he said last week, a declaration of intent. Doing what, she said. He wants to own one of those places downtown where they sell Kelliya San Marcos and clothing and keychains and Coca-Cola and glass bottles. The San Marcos blankets are super plush and have different designs on them, like cute kittens and majestic lions and strawberry shortcake and the Dodgers. A few weeks ago, Lucia took me downtown and had me pick one out. The air downtown is always the color of a nasty logie, but I like the buildings because they've got character, which is also why I love the blankets. The one I chose had a white tiger on it, lounging like a queen. You take it with you when you go to college, Lucia said, and it was like she was preparing us both for goodbye. I wish I could take you with me to college, I joked, and we laughed, but then I felt kind of bad because it made it seem like Lucia was my personal servant. When I was younger and had a nightmare, I would walk downstairs to Lucia's room and crawl into bed with her, and she would tell me stories about her boys and her country and the handsome but very bad man devil she divorced before she ran to the United States. He did unforgivable things, she said, for what he thought were the right reasons. She used to think so too until she didn't. And so he became the villain in my bedtime stories. Tell me about Arturo, who lives in the house by the bridge, I'd say. Jose is not like Arturo, I say to Lucia. Jose is a good man. What's a good man, Lucia sighs. They're all good until they're not. But I see the way she looks at him, like maybe she'd like to sell cobillas and clothing and knickknacks and Coke and glass bottles with him. Like maybe she could sit up on his roof, cuddle up in a blanket, and watch the fireworks over Dodger Stadium. I can see her dreaming up their life together and deciding maybe they could be good. I wonder if she's going to tell him today that she's leaving soon. Although I try not to watch, my gaze finds its way back to the television screen. The truck driver lies on the ground in a halo of his own blood and hair. Nobody goes to help him. The police are nowhere to be found. Some man walks up, takes the wallet right from the truck driver's pocket, and runs off. Finally, the truck driver gets to his knees, and another man comes up almost out of nowhere and appears to kick him in the head. I feel myself wince. Go out with me, Jose says to Lucia. It's the first time he said it for real and not just as a joke. On the television, the man drags himself into his truck and tries to drive away. The people at the intersection continue to throw anger at passing cars. From up above, it looks like somewhere I've driven through 1,000 times, but also somewhere I've never been. I bet my dad would know where it is. Okay, Lucia says softly to Jose. And I look over at her because she's going home to Guatemala, and what's even the point of going on a date when you're going to leave? But maybe that bloody truck driver made her forget. Or maybe he reminded her why she left. Or maybe being around Jose makes her think she might want to stick around a little bit longer. Jose completes the rest of the transaction in silence. On our way home, as we cross the street, Lucia reaches for my hand like she used to when I was little. And even though I haven't done so in a long time, I hold it. By the time we get home, the city is burning. The buildings are stripped bare, and the people yank the guts through their skeletons. Lucia hands me a small envelope. The cats have said it was accidentally delivered to them, and they kept forgetting to bring it over. You open it, I say. My heart feels like it's going to fall right out my chest and splat right on the kitchen floor. It's your future, mija. The envelope says my future's been waitlisted. I want to cry. I'm in at other schools, really good schools even, but Stanford is the school I want. Close to home, but far enough away to be some other me. Somewhere I can briefly stop being a sister and a daughter, but only an hour's flight away in case Joe needs me. I don't know for what exactly. Maybe in case her broken brain delivers a rough uppercut and she needs me to pull her up, squirt some water in her mouth, ice her bruises, and tell her to keep fighting. I need to be somewhere I can still feel the ocean, my ocean, in my hair and skin. I'm convinced Stanford is the only place I'll thrive. I want to throw up. I want to disappear. I want to crawl into a hole with embarrassment. I feel all of these things and burn up in their atmosphere as I hurtle down. Lucia pats me on the thigh. Everything will work out all right. Instead of crying, I watch. Up goes a shoe store. Up goes a laundromat. Up goes a TV repair store. Up goes a mattress store. Up goes a liquor store. All of it goes up. My mother calls me from her car phone. It's going to be a while. I'm going to try to take the 101 to the 405 and see if that's better. I'm afraid to get on the 10. My father calls me from his car phone. I'm okay. I'll get there when I get there. It's bad, really bad. Stay home, okay? Promise you won't try to go out with your friends. Not tonight. I promise. I call Joe from our living room. The phone rings and rings, and I'm afraid she's not there, but she is. Are you okay? I asked. Of course I'm not. It's so wrong. I'm so tired of this shit. They had the goddamn evidence right in front of their faces. It was right there, Ashley. I mean, they don't even effing see us even when they're looking right at us. Usually when Joe goes on about one of her causes, it feels so far away. Like she's angry because she knows she should be and not because she actually feels that shit in her kidneys. But this feels different. Even I feel it somewhere in my innards pulsing. You should come home, I say, until everything's blown over. I'm not leaving Harrison here alone, she says. Stupid Harrison. Just because he maybe survived tetanus doesn't mean he can save her from everything else. Just bring him here with you. I'm not subjecting him to Mom again after what happened at dinner. Is it him you're really concerned about, or you? I say. She doesn't respond. Joe, don't do anything stupid, please. I think of her handcuffed to her high school flagpole, fighting for brown people halfway across the world. She spent her suspension calling our local congressperson. Joe's the kind of person who would accidentally find herself in the middle of somebody else's riot. Dude, what the hell, Ash? The phone clicks, and then my sister's gone. And that is chapter 5.
That was great. Thank you. So for questions, I just have a couple for you. So my first question is, what inspired you to write this book from the perspective of the Rodney King riots? In a way, history is repeating itself.
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's funny, I started thinking about this book back in 2010, and initially I was thinking of it as a short film because I was in grad school for film. And I didn't ultimately end up making that short film, but in 2016, I then started to envision it as a short story, and I wrote it as a short story. And it was funny because then my agent reached out to me, was like, have you considered making this a novel? And at first I was like, no, I've done the idea, it's good. But the more I reflected on it, the more I thought about how similar the parallels were between what we were seeing in 2016 with the rise of Black Lives Matter and with the rise of smartphones, and seeing all these instances of unequal policing and police brutality in our homes and on our screens. And the 1992 riots are really the first time that we see that. So the 1992 riots are the first time, or the Rodney King beating specifically, it's the first time you get a civilian bystander really recording an instance of police brutality, and then that being broadcast to the world. And it just felt like a great way to look at the parallels between past and present, and how those things connect, and what we've learned and what we haven't learned, and just sort of using a historical lens to hold a mirror up to our present time.
Amazing. Do you think that we've made progress from that time? Or do you think that things are very much similar to what has already happened?
I think it's both. I think there's room for both in that answer. We've clearly made some huge strides as in the United States and internationally in terms of an awareness of some of the issues that Black people are facing internationally when it comes to policing, and really struggling or trying to get more diverse perspectives out there so that we can better understand these issues. But as we've seen, especially in 2020, there haven't been enough systematic changes made. So we haven't had our institutions keeping pace with progress in that way. And I think what we're seeing this year is really people calling for change in a more meaningful way than just symbolic gestures, and just sort of token gestures. And so I really do think that we are seeing progress, but the history of progress, especially in the United States, just since that's sort of the lens through which I know it, it's always been 2 steps forward to 1 step back. So in terms of, one of the reasons I look throughout the book at 1992 and then 1965 and the Tulsa race riots is just to show how we kind of, progress gets made, and then there's always that push against progress. And I think something that we've seen very recently is that there was the progress of the Obama era, and immediately there's a backlash that results in the Trump era, and people sort of coming out of the woodwork to express their frustration with a Black man having been president, and with the gains that people are making, people of color and women and queer people. So we're always fighting towards a more inclusive future. And I think it's just kind of, unfortunately, it's been a slow, steady process instead of the accelerated process that we would really hope to see. So the short answer is yes and no.
Yeah, I agree too. Were there any events in the book that were inspired by like your own life experiences and things that you experienced, like maybe like in high school, things like that? Because the main character is in high school as well. So like,
so it's funny because I am not Ashley at all. I was like the super nerdy, super awkward speech and debate geek. And I was more at home reading books than talking to boys or cheerleading. I did not cheerlead or do any of that stuff. But I did use Ashley as the lens through which to explore what it felt like to be one of the few Black people in any situation I was in. So I come from a slightly more privileged background, not as privileged as Ashley, but definitely upper middle class. And so I went to private schools, I did horseback riding, I did swimming, I did all of that. And so I was very accustomed to being one of the few Black faces in my school. So a lot of the microaggressions she experiences are things that I definitely experienced firsthand. And even some of the anecdotes that make it into the book are specific to my experience. So for example, the drowning incident when she's in the pool and Kimberly tells her she can't be a mermaid. That actually happened to me at a party where I was a small child and somebody told me I couldn't be a mermaid. And I loved swimming. I loved being in the water. And it was like the first time I had this visceral reaction to somebody telling me I couldn't do something. I think that was maybe the first time that I really remembered somebody telling me that I couldn't do something because I was Black. So there was a lot of that where I just would slide in little things that had sort of shaped my experience of the world, but I'm definitely not Ashley.
I think it's actually very like great to see how like a lot of authors, when they write books, they'll put like kind of like their own life experiences, I guess, but like not really, but like kind of to like inspire certain situations. I think that's just, it's great.
They
So
always say write what you know, right? So sometimes you just start off with the basis and then you imagine a world around that.
mhm. And that's the thing about writing, it's just you can create kind of your own world, which is
Yeah,
very cool.
I love it.
My next question is, there was so much awareness about anti-Black racism after the beating of Rodney King, then the issue died down in the mainstream media, which is like a reoccurring theme that often happens. We saw it become more pronounced after the murder of George Floyd. How do you think the world can keep the momentum going about anti-Black racism?
Whew, you're asking me the hard questions. I think there are, it kind of goes back to your question about progress and what's happening and what's not happening. And one of the things that to me has been heartening about 2020 and the protests in 2020 is that we do see for the first time a really multiracial coalition of people demanding progress, which was not necessarily the case in 1992 or before that. A lot of times these, or even as few as like a few years ago when Black Lives Matter was really getting underway, yes, there were some people who were there in solidarity, but not nearly the numbers that we're seeing now. So what we're seeing is that more people are more aware, and I think there was a visceral response to that video. And I think the burden is really going to be making sure that once that's no longer in people's heads, that they still remember that this is still something we're fighting for, right? Because I think it's just human nature to have kind of a short attention span. Think of all the different movements that have happened where we're like, oh yeah, we need to fight against this here, or oh, policing in Nigeria. And then a few weeks later, it's completely out of the news cycle. So it becomes like having to sustain the conversations and hold people accountable in some ways where we're just holding friends accountable. Like, okay, you had the black square. What are you doing now? What are you donating to now? What are you giving your time to now? And often it's also education. Like education is huge. What are you reading now, right? Like I think building empathy through literature and through story, through film is huge because it allows people to really feel other people's experiences in a very visceral way, right? So if we as older people and also younger readers, if older people are getting those books into younger readers' hands, we're also laying the foundation for the next generation as well, and giving books to even like our peers or parents or whatever, so that it's just a different perspective from which to view these things, and then to hopefully realize that you need to keep fighting for that equality. So I think that it's going to be hard, but I do think there's a shift that's happened, and hopefully will continue to happen.
Okay, I agree with that too. You present your characters as being both good and bad to the point that you can sympathize with them. Why do you do this?
So I think Ashley's a really flawed character, as you know.
Very
She is
much
a
so.
deeply flawed character. And throughout the book, sometimes you're just like, get it together, Ashley. And to me, it's important that characters feel real. I think most people reside in the gray. I think that in real life, most people have things that they're beautiful about them and things that they could work on. And also, I think when you're growing up, there's just, for some people, they're the stages of learning to come into yourself. And that's what Ashley is learning over the course of the book, like how to be, really, I view it as her learning how to be good. She's learning how to be a good person, how to be a good friend, how to be a good sister, how to come into her community, into her Blackness. And she's kind of just on this journey to be better over the course of the novel. And I think that's something that we can all relate to. And I think in real life, there aren't that many people who present as villains necessarily. Like I think there's a saying that like even your villain is the protagonist of his or her own story or there. So I think that's really something to keep in mind when you're writing, or that's what I always keep in mind, that like even your villain, or your antagonist rather, even your villain is thinking that he or she is doing something because he or she needs to, or they need to, or it's, you know, like they're people are always very complicated and view themselves, for the most part, minus like sociopaths and psychopaths. There are reasons why people act the way they act, and a lot of that is rooted in hurt or rooted in just acting out because of what's going on in their personal lives. So I want to make sure that we're always, to me, I don't want to provide easy answers. I don't want to tell people how to think. I don't want people to feel like, oh, this is like the hero. Ashley's like, she's the hero, but she's a very faulty hero. And I also just think that we should all be learning and growing, and sometimes stories help us do that as well. So when you have a protagonist who is herself faulty, it allows us to say, okay, maybe I wasn't perfect at first, but I can change. And especially when you're telling a story like this one, I think it's important to allow for growth and allow the reader to sort of empathize with that growth and to see that growth in themselves.
I just want to say that I really appreciated Ashley's growth throughout the book as well, because in the beginning, you kind of see like, I kind of related to her a lot as well. And I think most people that read the book would relate to her character a lot as well, like when they were younger. And you kind of see her kind of grow into like, you know, recognizing like all of these different things around her and like figuring out what she should do about it and like how she should like respond to things. And I think that it's great.
Thank you.
Yeah. My next question is, in her you did a review with Nick Stone, and he wrote, it should be a required reading in every classroom. Throughout my 4 years of high school, I've not read a single book that isn't like racist or written by like a person who's like doesn't really have, I guess, the right to be talking about it in a way. Why do you think a book like yours is important for high school students to study in English?
Oof. That kind of breaks my heart that that's been your experience educationally, because I was hoping that for younger people it's been getting better. Because I remember growing up, the books I read were not books that really reflected own voices, experiences, as we call them now. I think it's important, and I was actually on a panel talking about this earlier today, so I'm going to steal what Desmond Hall said. He's an author of an upcoming book, but he said that books can be, and I believe he was paraphrasing somebody else. He said books can either be windows or mirrors, right? So if it's a window, you're allowing yourself to look through and experience somebody else's world that you maybe otherwise wouldn't. And if it's a mirror, it's reflecting your own experience back at you. And for kids of color and queer kids, a lot of times we don't get those books as mirrors where our experiences are reflected back at us. And it's important because that is a lens through which we can kind of grow to understand ourselves better. And I think there's really something very powerful about a story reflecting your own personal experience. So for me, I would hope that teachers increasingly are recognizing that in a multicultural society, these stories have the power to, like I said, build empathy by serving as windows, but also to allow other people to see themselves reflected and to feel that validation that comes with that, and to feel the power of not just being a character who's a victim or a slave or beaten in the civil rights movement. Like, you want characters to have agency, and you want characters to reflect a reality that is yours. And I think that's a very powerful thing to give younger people, especially. And I know I personally didn't really get that until college. And that was specifically because I was an English major, among other things. So I think it's really important to give kids the tools to understand themselves through literature, and also to give other kids the tools to empathize with other people's experiences through literature.
Okay. My next question is, when did you start writing? Like, what was the first like great thing that you wrote?
So I was a kid who was writing up until like midnight or so, and it was supposed to be my bedtime, but I had this little desk lamp that I'd shine on my bed so that my parents couldn't tell that I was still up, because it wasn't as big as like the main light. So I was writing from a very, very early age, and usually it was what we would now consider like fanfic, where I would like read a book or watch a TV show, and then I would kind of expand on that world. Or it's like, I loved Little Mermaid, I'm going to write a story about mermaids, or I saw this movie about foster children, I'm going to write about foster children. But the first thing that really stands out to me was, I think it was 4th or 5th grade, we were told to write a short story, and the teacher intended for it to only be like 1 or 2 pages, and I ended up writing like a 15-page story. So even as a kid, it was something I loved doing, but I didn't see it as a viable career choice until I was older. And I think that's because so often we prioritize the sciences over the humanities. And the sciences are very important, especially for young women and kids of color. But when that's the only way that we see a path to success, which I think a lot of times Black and brown communities do, where it's like, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be an engineer, you're going to do something that's like practical. I was like, I'm not going to make any money as an author. I should go into medicine or go into something more practical. So it was really in college when I was just like, I'm not good at other stuff. I'm good at writing. So I might as well stick with that. And long story short, that's how I ended up here. But it was a long journey. It was a pretty long journey.
Okay. What is your advice to like a young writer who is trying to like create like a story, I guess? That's not necessarily like inspired off of like TV shows and things like that, because I personally find when I'm like writing, I
Mhm,
often take from like my favorite TV shows or my
mhm,
favorite like books that I've already read. So like ideas that are have already like happened.
mhm.
Um so what's your advice for that?
So I think that's a really good question. And I think there's this kind of saying that's like all the stories that there are to tell have already been told. So if you think about books that are coming out, like for example, there's a book by Chloe, and I can't remember her last name, but it's called These Violent Delights, and it's a Romeo and Juliet retelling taking place in Shanghai that's coming out soon. So it's her story, right? But she's re-envisioned something that's very familiar and put her own personal spin on it. And I think that's kind of true often of a lot of our stories. For example, one of the things my book was deeply inspired by was the movie Clueless, because I loved that movie growing up. And Clueless is the story of a girl who starts off kind of selfish and in her own head, and learns to be sort of better over the course of it, which is itself a retelling of Emma by Jane Austen. So when you're thinking of like, oh, I have to do something original, I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think you can go and start with the foundation of, I really love this story, but how do I then build on it and make it mine? And sometimes it's the character. You're putting a new character in a situation. So, for example, with the Black kids, I'm putting Ashley Bennett, a privileged Black teenager, in the place of what would normally be like the rich white girl in a movie, right? Like in 90s movies, especially since that's when I grew up. In 90s teen movies, she would traditionally be uh, the Cher Horowitz, or the wealthy white girl moving through the world who needs to learn her lesson about how to be good. But then we add the layers of what are my specific experience. And my specific experience is that of being the Black person in these situations. And what does it mean to then have this huge moment of racial reckoning on top of all of that? So I think you can layer these things in and really make a story your own. And like what Chloe's doing, she's taking, if I'm understanding it correctly, she's taking Romeo and Juliet and adding on, how do I look at that as a lens for colonization, and setting it in the 1920s. So there are ways to take stories that you love and reimagine them for yourselves, and then they become completely different things. So I'm very much of the opinion that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can just take the wheel and carve it and make it your own. And sometimes that means starting with a character, and you put your character as, what does it mean if this is a girl instead of a boy? What does it mean if this is a queer person? What does it mean if this is somebody who is non-binary in this world? Or we take the world around them and change it. Like, what does it mean if this is in a fantastical setting? What does it mean if like this is the orphan in somewhere where there's magic? Um, so there's always like Harry Potter. So there's always ways where you take stories and you really can reinvent them and use them to your advantage, and use them just to jog your own imagination.
Okay. And my last question is, what are some lessons that you really want readers to take away from your book?
Ooh, that is a good one. I personally really hope that, and I've said this before, I hope what the reader takes away from it is love, because I view the book as a love letter of sorts. It's a love letter to girlhood and the intense friendships that you have with your besties when you're a teenager, and how those sometimes serve you or don't serve you as you move forward in life, and what do you do after that. It's a love letter to the Black childhood and the Black family, because I don't think we get enough of those. Just these people in this family, they love each other, even though they're struggling to communicate throughout the book. They do deeply love each other. It's a love letter to the Black community and what does it mean to be Black. And I think in the book, I really want to um, just sort of examine the beauty of Blackness, even in the face of intergenerational trauma. Even in the face of this moment that's like really painful to navigate, there's still a beauty in community. And I think just empathy. I always want to write to build empathy. I think empathy is so, so, so important. And it goes back to that whole, whether it's a mirror or a window, how do we then carry Ashley forward in life? Like, how does Ashley then move through the world in your heart? It sounds so cheesy, but how does having read Ashley's experience affect you as you move through life? So that's what I think I want readers to take away from it. And also just to see that the fight for progress is still ongoing, right? Like, I think we use history and arm us with that, or arm ourselves with that, to then know what we're fighting for in the present as well. And knowing your history can make you a super great activist.
I agree. Well, we're coming to an end. But
Q&A. Should I answer these real fast?
yes.
Okay. So the first person asked, do I think that stories and writing influence the younger generations? I think so. I think that when you have stories that reflect a more diverse perspective, you're allowing kids the lens to really understand where other people are coming from, and to maybe understand things about it that they wouldn't understand otherwise. And I think we're seeing that also now with younger people. I think younger people have grown up with more people of color and queer people on their television screens, and that then allows them hopefully to build more empathy for these characters. And for example, there's a show like Glee, which obviously is super cheesy, but years ago, that was kind of, Glee and Modern Family were kind of incendiary for having the queer representation that they had. So, but now it's considered kind of standard, right? So I do think that while there's obviously a lot more progress to be made, normalizing these things makes a huge difference in people understanding where other people are coming from and being able to see other people as human in ways that maybe might be harder for some people to otherwise. So I just think that it all kind of goes back to building empathy and creating the space for kids to recognize the humanity in everyone, and to celebrate the humanity in everyone. And I see, who am I reading now? Are there any authors who are particularly inspiring for me? Well, that is a hard question. That is a really hard question. So I am always reading, and I am always inspired. And there are so many incredible authors working in YA right now. I think that especially in 2020, there's been just kind of this crazy year for YA authors of color. So I have to say that my peers are like Elizabeth Acevedo. I have her book up here. She's an incredible writer, and her poetry is beautiful. Jason Reynolds' writing is poetic and beautiful and lovely. I actually read a lot of adult fiction, even though I'm a YA writer. So I just finished Transcendent Kingdom, and that was really beautifully written. I read Luster, which is obviously not a young adult title, and maybe hold off on that for a while. But that was something that the writing in it is gorgeous. So I'm constantly just reading other people's writing in awe, and I actually use that to jog my own writing. Because if I read something that I really respond to, I'm like, oh my God, that was so good. And then I get pumped to write, because it's almost like I get excited by what can be done with writing.
Do we have any more Q&A questions?
I'm feeling optimistic about America. The honest answer to that is that the steps for progress, like I said, it's always been kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So I think that there's a lot to be undone that's happened over the last administration. I think there's been, just climate-wise, there's a lot that needs to be undone. There's the racial attitudes that are super harmful that was stoked by this administration, and dangerous. And even what Trump has done with transgender rights, like there is a lot of work that needs to be undone. And that man sort of was just like a tornado in in this country. So I'm optimistic and I'm hopeful that there will be a shift, but I do know that the progress will be slower and steadier. But younger people and their activism is actually what gets me excited. And the fact that we are seeing younger people in positions of power and that we are seeing younger people being very vocal. I think that seeing Gen Z and millennial voices fighting for justice in like extremely cool ways, that is what makes me hopeful. So I don't know about politicians, but I think the people and are pushing for change in really great ways. And the fact that this election turned out the way it did made me perhaps more hopeful than I would have been a month or so ago. I see Nick Stone and Angie Thomas, have they influenced me in any way? And I have to say, I love Nick as a person. I don't know Angie as well, but she seems very lovely. But they haven't really influenced me just because I've been writing for a really long time. I think that they're doing really great work, and my book would not have necessarily had the path that it's had without their work. So I appreciate them and I applaud them. But I think I'd already had kind of my own voice before that. And for me, because I was writing in screenwriting before writing and fiction writing, and because I'd studied fiction writing way back when, and I'm a little older than them, I kind of had that voice already established, and the kind of stories that I wanted to tell were already there before they came on the scene. But I am very grateful to them for having trailblazed in the way that they did. And the next, do I find that having a background in screenwriting is good for writing a novel? I absolutely do. I think that having a background in screenwriting is so helpful for writing a novel, because otherwise it is a very daunting undertaking. Like deciding to write 100,000 words or so, that is a lot. And National Novel Writing Month is, I think, around 50,000 words, which is still a lot. But what screenwriting helped me do was break it down into the structure of telling a story. So in screenwriting, there's a very particular way to tell a story if you're doing traditional Hollywood screenwriting. And I use that to structure the book. And once I had that in place, you can blow that up, like you don't have to use it, but it's very good just for getting it down on the page and thinking about story and making sure all of your plot points are kind of connecting and moving forward. And also, I think I'm just a very visual writer because of the screenwriting background. And I'm constantly thinking of like, what would the score be if this were a movie? What do things smell like? Like, what do they look like? So I think that the background in screenwriting is very helpful. And I generally think that having studied different types of storytelling is really, really, really helpful as a writer, no matter what. Like making sure that you were constantly taking in song and plays and visual arts, like all of it is really important to making yourself the best writer you can be.
Are there any more Q&A questions? I actually have a question. So I see like the cover. What inspired you to make the cover like this way? Because like you can see like the palm trees are kind of on fire in her glasses and stuff.
So I have to give all credit to the artist responsible and also the graphic design team responsible for the book. They came to me with the concepts, several different concepts, and I really liked the sunglasses concept. And they took it and ran with it and made it that beautiful thing that you see, where when I saw it, I like started crying because I was like, that's exactly what I want the cover to look like. And then they also made it cool so that it has like the reflective stuff going on. And so my input was kind of minimal. It was more like, I think there should be more flames, or, oh, I wonder what kind of earrings she should have, or yes, color in the hair, no color in the hair. But really all of that is just big ups to Adriana Billette, who did the cover art, and to Lucy Ruth Cummings, who is the cover design person at my particular publisher. So I love it. I think it was really thoughtfully done and works great thematically with it, but I cannot take credit for their genius.
Okay. Um, are there any more questions that anyone wants to ask?
Stop reading some books that were part of the curriculum in high school before. Yes. So this person asked, do I believe that we should stop reading some of the books that were part of the curriculum in high school before? And my answer to that, I personally believe yes. And here's why. I think canon, as it's known, has traditionally relied on narratives from a very specific Western point of view. They're often, I mean, there's often not even a lot of women in what's taught necessarily. So if you're only getting stories from white men from the 1800s or the 1950s, you're not allowing for the richness of storytelling and the way that it's evolved, and honestly, the way it's always been, right? So I think that with high school especially, the goal is to get kids excited about reading. You want to create readers who are voracious and who want to pick up a book and who see themselves in these books and who can maybe use these books to understand the world around them in meaningful ways. And I do think there's a place for canon. I think that there's beautiful writing in all of the canonical books, but there's also a lot of problems in the canonical books. So I think if, for example, if I were designing the curriculum in high school, I would probably try and lean more towards own voices stories with the canon included, or allow for the canon to be taught in university level when people are wanting to do more of a deep dive. And then that allows people to really study those books in that way, but we're not using those only when we're trying to just get kids excited about writing and reading, because I don't think that works for a lot of kids. And I think that there are a lot of people I know who would be far more voracious readers had they had teachers who really sought out books that offered different perspectives rather than just sort of the same old Great Gatsby, To Kill a Mockingbird, Fahrenheit 451. And like I said, those books are good books. I just think that there's perhaps a place for them either in addition to Own Voices books, or once people reach a certain level of education where they can study those books outside of high school or junior high settings. I see this person ask, have you had different reactions to my book from different generations of readers? That's a really good question. I think so. And I think it's interesting talking to young people and people slightly older than me. So people who are slightly older than me, since I'm a millennial, Gen Xers have a perspective of having been in high school at the time and of kind of a more visceral response in some ways to the events that happened because they lived it. And I think maybe also for some older people, it's thinking about things in a way that they hadn't necessarily thought about it before. And with younger people, it's saying, hey, this has been great to see my experience as we're experiencing things in 2020 reflected on the page, or my experience as being one of the few people in my school or my community. So there have been different responses based, I think, on individual experiences and also just generational differences in terms of people thinking about different aspects of the book, whether it's like the high school stuff or the racial justice stuff or the mental health stuff. And that's been really interesting to see how different ages responded to all of that. But also I try to filter out what I read just for my own mental health. I try to keep it limited to either events or Instagram. So I don't know necessarily everything that people are saying, but in general, it's been positive. A part of the book that was my favorite to write. Oof. So I can tell a character that was my favorite to write. My character that was my favorite to write was LaShawn, because I think he is just a beautiful, kind spirit. And I think that we don't often get the space for sensitive Black boys in fiction. At least historically, we haven't had that. So I wanted to write a boy from South LA who is super smart, and he also happens to be gifted at basketball, and he's just also very thoughtful. And yes, he makes a mistake that ends up being kind of a big mistake because of how people are treating him. But he's a good kid. And I think often in stories, we've seen caricatures of those boys, right? Like we don't get to see those boys as full people. And I just wanted to write somebody who felt like somebody I could know, and just do honor to the boys that I have known who grew up in those circumstances, who don't get represented as lovingly, I think is one way of putting it. So writing him was my favorite. And in terms of the actual parts of the book, I loved different parts of it depending on when I was working on it. And I think that has to be the way you move through writing. Like whenever you're writing a section, you have to love what you're doing with that section. So for me, I think I would fall in love with different parts depending on where I was in the process. Or if I was editing it, I'd be like, I hate this. I have to go and like reconfigure this. But then when I was done editing it, I'd be like, oh my God, I love this. This is so great. So I do think it's just kind of, for me, I would fall in and out of love with things based on where I was. But in terms of characters, I love LaShawn, and Joe is probably closest to me in some ways. Like Joe is probably closer to who I am as a person. So I liked writing her and exploring mental health through her lens, because I think that's really important. It's something that we don't really talk enough about, mental health and kids of color, and what the toll can be on your mental health of being the only one in any particular community or school or university.
Okay, so that's all the time we have for tonight. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for having this discussion. It was great. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you so much for spending time with us and then taking time out of your day to come here and join us. I appreciate all of you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bonsoir.